everybody, what's going on? I'm Aslan Hajivandi, joined by managing editor Ira Schoffel, senior lead writer Corey Clark. We all work for Warchant.com, the ultimate Seminoles sports source. Promo code is Warchant30. If you could, hit that thumbs up button. If you're not a member, even if you are a member, doubly show us your appreciation, because we certainly appreciate you folks tuning in this offseason. We're trying to keep things interesting, trying to be optimistic and forward-thinking, Corey and Ira. And we're talking about what if. We've talked about what if Mackenzie Milton ends up having a great season, much the way he had in his previous endeavors when he was at UCF. What if Jermaine Johnson is a defensive, chaotic, developing force? And let's keep it on the defense now. We're talking about, Ira, what if this defense, which was 107th last year, what if, Ira, they would be about, 50 to 60, somewhere in that vicinity? What would that mean? You, myself, Corey, Gene, we batted this question around. Now we got to talk about it live here, or recorded rather. So what does happen? What happens, Ira? What if this is a top 50 or 60 defense?
Well, I think, right off the bat, I think it takes a lot of pressure off the offense. I think in some of those games last year where, if the offense had an empty possession or had a turnover and the defense couldn't get a stop, now you're down 2 scores or you're down 3 scores. And now the offense, you kind of have to scrap everything you're doing. You can't follow a game plan once you get behind 20 or more points. So that, to me, that's as big a thing as anything. It takes pressure off the offensive line. You don't have to get in pass mode, which obviously puts a lot of pressure on the offensive line. So again, especially early in games, getting some stops. It doesn't have to be the 2013 defense. It doesn't have to create a lot of opportunities. But I just think if they're just competent and force, 6 punts a game, 5 punts a game, whatever, 4 punts a game, then at least it takes a lot of the pressure off the offense, which I think is a huge deal, especially for kind of new starting quarterbacks. Jordan and Mackenzie both have experience, but whoever wins the job, it'll be their first time is the kind of signature Florida State quarterback.
Corey.
Yeah, Aslan, what's up, buddy?
How are you, man? What if? I mean, we spoke about on the podcast. I want to double back and ask the same question, Ira, but just initially, when you think about that, you think about this team entering this season. If right now, 53rd ranked defense, what if they have that? What does that mean for Florida State in 2021?
I like to think, what if we had done something like this in 2014, like an exercise like this? Like, what if Florida State has the 54th best defense in the country? Fire everyone. Everyone's gone. Everybody's out of work. Jimbo needs to go. Like, it says something that this is one of the what ifs, is to just get in to the average zone, like straight up average in the country. But when you're starting from a place when you literally, I will make the argument it was the worst defense in Power 5. I know there were worse defenses statistically, but if Florida State had played the schedule it was supposed to play last year with Clemson and Florida, they would have given up 500 yards a game on average. Both those teams would have put up 600 yards and 50 points, and they would have probably been the worst defense in the country. So you have a long way to go to be competent. You have a long way. You just look at those numbers. I mean, the defensive numbers are just a train wreck. Nothing is good. Literally, everything's in the 90s or the hundreds. So if you got into the 50s, that theoretically that means you probably got pretty good at stopping something. You're not going to stop everything because you're not good yet. But you theoretically, maybe you're in the top 30 in rush defense or passing efficiency defense. Either way, I think what it does is, like Ira said, it gives the offense, there's not so much pressure on the offense. And you think, Ira, about the games last year, Aslan too, like the Louisville game. They couldn't get a stop against Louisville. So the offense, I think, scored touchdown on its first 2 drives, or 2 of its first 3, or at least its first drive, and was driving again. And then Louisville, who did not have a good offense, just could not be stopped. And when that happens, the game is completely tilted to where it's not anything you've coached for. And the same thing happened with NC State. NC State scored every time it got the ball in the first half. Bailey Hawkman's never done that in his life. Even backyard football games at Thanksgiving, he couldn't do that. Against Florida State, he did. And I just think if you have a competent defense, a 54th ranked defense, you force a couple punts in the first half. And maybe your offense goes down and scores. And then instead of being down by 3 or 4 scores at halftime, you're down by a score, and there's real game pressure on the other team. And so I think, like I wrote, I think it's worth 1.5 wins, at least, to go from worst in the country to middle of the pack is probably worth 1.5 to 2 wins if your defense can make that adjustment.
Ira, we're talking about this on the podcast, and I agree with Corey. I mean, we were talking a little bit about last season, what they would have looked like had they had a defense that ranked 50th, 60th. I don't want to blame them too much for the Georgia Tech game, though they were a little bit leaky at times. But you both made a point, and you've said it as well, Ira, but it's valid to think about what happens when you go to half and you've only surrendered 14 points rather than 28 points, which seemed to be the case every single time they played. But to kind of move it forward a little bit, so we say they'll be 54th or whatever, Ira. Does it change, I guess, that range that most of us are kind of existing in right now, where we think Florida State's probably going to win somewhere between 5 to 8 games? Like if you know they're going to have a defense that's average, do you move up to the 9-win? Like is 10-win a possibility, or do you just find yourself a little bit of a more firm ceiling saying, all right, well, they'll probably be 7-5 then. If you can let me know that, I'll go to 7-5. I'll move off 6-6.
Well, that's the thing. That's what's so hard about this whole, projecting what Florida State's going to be in 2021 is because there's such a wide variety of range of what they could be. I think if you look at the individual talent, I think the defense could be a top 50, top 40, maybe even a top 40, possibly a top 50 type defense. When you look at the individual parts, it doesn't make sense that they were as bad as they were last year. So if that happens, yeah, man, like I definitely could be a difference in a couple games. And I, right now I would say I'd predict them at 6 or 7 wins. So that could put them at maybe 8 wins or maybe even 9 wins. But there are so many other variables too, like the quarterback play. Like the quarterback play could be, as we touched on in the what if. I mean, Mackenzie Milton, the ceiling is really high for what he could be if he returns to that form. Or they could play kind of like what they played for much of the spring and in the past, which was just kind of average, not very good at all. So there's an unknown there. There's an unknown about the wide receivers. You're bringing in a transfer, and Andrew Parchman, who we talked about in one of these what ifs. He could have a 1,000-yard season like he did 2 years ago. Ontario Pokey Wilson could have a big season, or they could be kind of average. So because of that, like I think this team could be a 5-win team. It could be a 9-win team. And really, these are kind of the things that are going to determine that. So, yeah, to your point, yeah, I think if the defense – when I say they're probably going to be a 7-win team, 6-7 wins, and the reason Vegas has the over-under at 5.5 or 6 is because you can't predict that the defense is going to play well. But if it does, if we knew that, if it happened, yeah, I think for sure 7-8 wins, maybe even 9 wins, because they'll be in every game. And now you've got a better chance in some of those coin toss games.
Corey answered this question on the podcast, but any final thoughts, Corey? I mean, can we do it? When can we get a week by week win-loss prediction out of you, Corey? I mean, look at this. Aren't you champing at the bit, looking at this, thinking, all right, they got the 57th ranked defense. I'll run through the schedule right now, week by week, and give you a prediction. Or no, you're still not ready?
No, I don't want to do that. But I will say I agree with what Ira was saying about if you have an average defense, they were blown out of so many games in 18 too. But they were blown out of so many games last year that it didn't even feel like a real – like the NC State game, I think they cut it to 2 scores sometime in the third quarter. It's hard to remember those games. They all run together. But they were never in that game because the defense was so bad. If the defense can if they're an average defense, you're in – instead of being blown out in 5 games, you're blown out in 2 games. And then maybe the other 3 games, you win 1 or 2 of those games that are the coin flip games. They're going to have more coin flip games than that. You know what I mean? But they should be, if you have an average defense, you should be in more games in the fourth quarter.
I mean, well, I was just going to say, look, you didn't even mention Pitt last year. I mean, it's ridiculous. You're giving up 40 points to teams that are not any good.
Yeah,
that's
Bailey Hawkman. The Pitt doesn't score 40 against anyone.
On a bum wheel.
They were so bad at getting points that they would kick field goals down by 4 from the opponent's 2-yard line. Like they didn't even know what it was like to score touchdowns until they got to Tallahassee. So, but my point being, if you're going to say this team has I do think the defense will be better, number one, because I think the only good player you lost was Asante Samuel from last year's team. Marvin Wilson, Corey Durden have been good in the past. They were not good last year. You've replaced non-production with production. So these guys have done it before, and they produced last year. So you feel better probably about the personnel than you did looking back in hindsight on last year. But for this team to have a leap to 9 or 10 wins, the offense will have – I know this isn't an offensive video, but it will have to be much, much better because don't you guys think the ceiling for this defense is 45-ish to 50-ish, right? You can only be so good if your defense is 50th and your offense is 40th. That's average. That's a 6-6 season. If your offense somehow becomes a top 12 or 15 defense or offense, well, then maybe that's how you miracle a 9 or 10 win season. You're competent in one thing and you're good at the other. Right now, I feel like most Florida State fans think they'll take average in both. Do you want the offense? We think the offense will be ahead of the defense, but we haven't seen that yet. So if they're both average in both, you're looking at 6 or 7 wins at the best. If one of them becomes pretty good, and that would have to be the offense because we don't think the defense will be good, then maybe you can sneak to 9 wins, right?
Well, one thing I would say,
there's 100, there's like 120 whatever teams. If you're 50, you're not average. You're above average.
I'm talking about Power 5, though. I mean, you're always going to be ahead of Rice and UTEP. I see you're a little. Yeah.
When if we're saying Power 5, then we'd be like, what if they're a top 20? Defense?
Yeah. No, I got you.
And you have a couple of wins that you should have just by going out there. I think the thing that the difference between being so bad on defense and just being average, I just think back to that 2009 Florida State team, which used to be the gold standard of terrible Florida State defenses,
right?
Or whatever the opposite of gold is, because they couldn't stop the run or the pass. And it just made it impossible. Like Mickey Andrews, what's he going to call? There's no play calls when you can't stop the run or the pass. And I think that's what they were last year, maybe even worse than that defense. And so if you could just get decent in one area, again, that just it makes everything easier for the coaches. And then, to your point, Corey, though, I don't think the offense has to be great, but let's see what it could do if it's not playing from behind.
Yeah.
With a quarterback, they were playing from behind with a quarterback who wasn't a great thrower. I mean, the deck was really stacked against them. So I just think it gives you a fair chance. If Michael Norvell is the play caller that, we think he could be, the design of plays, if they can, the offensive line improves, and if they're just competent and can capitalize on opportunities, they might, be better than average. Maybe. I don't think they're going to be much better than average, but they could be a little bit better than average.
Did you just call him Michael?
He did.
Did I? Michael
Norvell. Yeah. You went old school, like you were calling him in out from outside.
Thinking about Langston
in the garage.
Langston's on the mind.
When hey, look, if they have another Pitt game or an NC State game, we're just going to have to start calling him Michael.
Yeah, figure out his middle name. Start calling him by that too.
All right, what else we got cooking over at warchant.com this weekend coming up here, Ira?
Man, a lot of we're rolling out some of the coverage from the football interviews we had this week. We'll have some recruiting. Austin and Michael, the other Michael Langston is coming back from his little vacation. So he'll be doing some recruiting updates, and we've got some, other announcements, the addition to the site and some things like that. So we'll, you just gotta stay tuned to warchant.com. You never know what's coming up next.
Awesome. Got some podcasts dropping this week too. Check those out. For Ira and Corey, I'm Aslan. Thanks for watching. Stay connected to warchant.com, the ultimate Seminole sports source.